Welcome to BookWorthy, where we talk about the heart behind the books your kids are reading. Today, we're talking with cycling legend John Kennedy Howard. John is a 3-time Olympian, Pan Am gold medalist, and Ironman champion. If that wasn't enough, John has 5 book titles and hundreds of articles spanning every facet of cycling. His latest book is a grade sports history piece called The Black Cyclone, a story of the first acclaimed African-American sports hero, Marshall Major Taylor, a hero the world forgot. Welcome to BookWorthy, John.
Thank you, Valerie. Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. I enjoyed reading through this book and learning something new, both about cycling and about history itself. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, Major Taylor, I would have to say, was a boyhood hero. There were a number of cyclists that came to mind, but Major Taylor stood out because of what he endured in terms of his race. He was a real pioneer in the field of sports. Let's see, how would I describe Major Taylor? He was, well, yes, the first acclaimed African American sports hero, but this was an era when cyclists were the top athletes of the day. They certainly outranked baseball players, and part of that was because it was an extraordinarily dangerous sport, and you could die racing bicycles. So Major Taylor was at one point the highest paid athlete in the world, bar none, and he didn't just arrive at that. He was a childhood prodigy. He raced in Indianapolis as a teenager, 13 years old when he won his first race, and he did it convincingly. It wasn't just a fluke. He actually beat the top riders of the day, or at least in the Midwest. The first race that he entered was a handicap, which means that he would have started first. And all of the top riders, he would have been following him, chasing him down. And he actually crossed the finish line ahead of the Indiana state champion, Walter Marmon, who went on to great fame as the builder of the Marmon automobile, which won the first Indy 500 in 1911. So was totally impressed with Major Taylor. He said, when the officials said there's no way we can give this black kid this race medal. It was a gold medal, but Marmon stood up for him. He said, he beat me fair and square, give him the damn thing. So that was sort of the way it unraveled for the sport in Indianapolis was sort of a manufacturing hub post-revolution era, and many of the automobiles, the high-tech automobiles of the day came out of Indianapolis, as did of course, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But there's so many stories. The track was where Major Taylor did a lot of his racing, the Newby Loop. One of the founders of the Indy 500 Motor Speedway was Arthur Newby, and they tore that bicycle track down to build what is now the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Yeah, a lot of connections in motor racing, because the bicycle was quite literally the platform for the motorcycle and then the automobile. And so many of the inventions, and most profoundly the pneumatic tire, came from the bicycle, the lowly bicycle. All of this is historical fact, and I think it's important to bring it out because bicycles were, very, very popular in their day. And you have to remember the fastest vehicles on the planet at the time were express trains, and they were coal driven. So that and racehorses. And so when some of the first records were set, they were set behind railroad cars, and one of them achieved a speed of 60 miles an hour behind the Long Island Express train, where they had laid boards between the rails, and that was That was thought to be, at the time, looking back at it historically, the equivalent of Lindbergh's crossing of the Atlantic. That's how popular that event was. And it was a railroad promotion, of course, but it just captured the attention of the world at the time. So when Major Taylor won a race, it was big news. And unfortunately, there would be a lot of resistance. It was a real dichotomy because they thought at the time that he should not be allowed to race because of his color. He had very dark skin, and of course, in the day, you were judged by the color of your skin, and because of that, he was just, at least in the United States, treated very, very badly, and there were several attempts on his life. One that occurred back in, I believe it was Pennsylvania, where a rider strangled him from behind. He was not a big man. He was 5'6", 5'7", and another rider grabbed him from behind and wrestled him off the bicycle and proceeded to strangle him. And if it hadn't been for the constable with a billy club, he may very well have killed Major Taylor right there on the spot, on the track.
Wow.
So this is sort of the what he had to endure in order to win first the national championship in 1898, and then the world championship in Montreal, Canada, in 1899.
What did you have to do to learn more about this man?
Lots. I spent many hours in the microfiche labs at the I call it the Rum Library in Sydney, Australia, to get that portion of the story. And then the same thing of the Bibliothèque in Paris, tons of information on that era of sports. And I actually have some of the original press clippings from the day. The paper was better quality than it is today in newsprint. So I have some of that stuff. And I followed, there are actually 5 biographies on Major Taylor. I used all of the available information because they all revealed something new about the man. And in addition, I had one huge advantage. I started in the 80s. It's embarrassing how long it took me to write this book, but my co-author, Renee Maurer, and I began really hammering it out and putting the pieces together after my interviews with Major Taylor's daughter, Sydney Taylor Brown, who I just called her up. I introduced myself and told her I wanted to write a book about her father, and this was before any of the biographies were out. And she was very receptive and invited me to come back to Pittsburgh and interview her, which I did several times. And I got, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. There was so much material there that was not contained had never been revealed. And I'm sure I spent more time with Sydney than any other reporter. She died at 102, and she lived a very healthy life. When I met her in her 80s, she was still extremely lucid and told me things about her father, some of which ended in tears because she just couldn't go there. But it was not so much the period where he was at his prime. It was later, after his retirement. And what I wrote was a biographical novel. And I gave voice to Major Taylor because I believe wholeheartedly that I had enough information that I could really flush out the character and his tone of voice and what pissed him off and what he had to endure, and all of those various ingredients blended into this book. And the value of that is that, it's a version of history that needed to be told.
I love that you've done that you've stepped into a place where you saw a gap and a need to tell Major Taylor's story. Why did you write this for younger readers?
Well, I think I need to put this in perspective. There will indeed be another version coming out right now, that is not our primary market, but it will be. I'm launching into a whole new realm of AI. And one of our very first, I think I could say, rewrites of the Black Cyclone, which we will certainly have to do, will be a children's version of it. So that is a huge priority, and we are moving in that direction. Also, the book is available in all formats: hard copy, soft copy, ebook, and Audible.
Very exciting. Now, how has Major Taylor's story affected you and your passion for cycling?
Well, first of all, I was inducted into the United States Cycling Hall of Fame the same year as my boyhood hero in 1989. I can't tell you what a huge honor that was, because I revere him more than any other athlete in the world. And so what followed was a completely different set of styles. Major Taylor was a pure sprinter who also had the capacity, and they proved that in the New York 6-day race. And when he was 18 years old, they entered him in a 6-day race, and he actually finished 7th, which was remarkable considering what he was up against. And his distance covered something, I think it was 3,000 miles on a 250-meter board track with banking. Would have won the event the previous year. Back to what I was saying earlier, he was still a pure sprinter. I am not a sprinter. I am a slow twitch, Anglo-American, and the African American, the red fibers are so important, and this is one of the reasons that black athletes today are such incredible sprinters and excel in all the ball sports because of that fast twitch muscle fiber. I'm more endurance oriented. When I won sprints, it took a lot of finesse in order to do it. With Major Taylor, what he had to endure, there would be times when a third of the field in a final heat race of the night would be riding not to win, but to make sure he didn't win. Tremendous odds. And yet, because of his skill set, and he was trained as a bicycle acrobat, he trained himself, actually. Nobody else helped him with that one, but he was so adept and so well coordinated that he could do things on a bike that nobody in the era of that era could do. So he had that ability to stand on the saddle and steer the bike with his feet, and do things that today are somewhat common in bicycle acrobatics. The Germans have really perfected that art, but nothing that Major Taylor didn't do in 140 years ago. So the fact of the matter is, he was so well coordinated and so well balanced that he could slip through holes. He was not a tall man, and because of that, he rode through holes that were in the pack that weren't intended nobody else could get through there, but he did. He wove his way through, and by no means did he win all the races, but he certainly won his share against incredible odds. So I give him credit for that. Eventually, he realized that the racism that he was enduring in the U.S. was not to be the case in Europe. He negotiated a contract. Took him 2 years to negotiate a contract with, let's see, who would that have been? The French promoter, Victor Briere. And that was important because when the first contract was spelled out, it required him to race on Sundays. Now, Major Taylor was a Christian. He didn't believe in that. He promised his mother on her deathbed, literally, that he would never race on the Sabbath. And he didn't until the very end of his career, when they finally held his feet to the fire and said, if you don't race on Sunday, you won't race, period. But before that, this is important that cycling was big in Europe. I mean, it was as big in Europe, throughout Europe, as it was in actually bigger than in America. And they changed the entire structure of bicycle racing to accommodate him. And that meant, I think there's a fair amount of truth to this. They loved their opera on Saturdays and they went to bicycle races on Sunday. And that's how it went. That's the preferred method. Well, they had to change that to accommodate the champion of the world. And they did. And that lasted, I'm really getting ahead of myself here and I probably shouldn't do this, but at the end of his career, he had been beaten up and his career was very long. Almost 10 years he stayed at the top of the sport, but it eventually got to him. And when the announcement was made, well, you're not winning as many races as you used to, so we're going to just tell you straight away, you've got to change your pattern. At which point his career went downhill, abysmal. He couldn't conceive of what it was like to race on a day that he'd always spent time reading his Bible and being a pious young man. Well, he wasn't young anymore. He was older. In spite of that, he maintained his speed, and I will give a little bit of a story. At the end of his career, it was four tours of Europe. He finally realized that it was time to come home. So one of the last things that he did was race the world championship. Well, he didn't even make it to the quarter. He didn't get there. And again, it was on Sunday. So finally, his sponsor, Alcyon Cycles, and they were well known in the era because they featured women in very sparsely clad bicycle outfits. And so very popular European brand. Alcyon directors told him or asked him, would you please go to Rouen and battle the recent French world champion? And this young man was in the era that 10 years was a big jump. He was at least 10, 12 years younger than Major Taylor. He was the French and world cycling sprint champion. And nobody gave Major Taylor any chance at all of winning against this guy. And so he went to Rouen because it was a Saturday event. And that was the clause that he finally got across. Said, I will race him on Saturday. Well, against all odds, the sprint races are 3 up. So you have 3 events, 3 sprints, and the first one, he actually beat the young rider by, Alcyon tire width. It was so close. He just nosed him out. The second heat was taken by the Frenchman, and the third heat, he used every resource, everything he understood about racing bicycles, and he walloped the young guy by almost a length and a half.
Wow.
So that tells you he still had it. And his last event was in, I believe I believe it was the Newark track where this was in 1917, and he had been out of retirement, or he jumped back into retirement and from retirement to race in this event. And the bicycle that he actually used was loaned to him by, let's see, how quickly we forget these names. I'll think of it, I'm sure. But anyway, I interviewed this guy for a long time, and he had loaned Major Taylor his best bike, and I caught him in literally the closing months of his life. And that was the case on several of his contemporaries who were much younger than Taylor. But he loaned him the bike, and Taylor dominated it. He just ate it up. And, he wasn't going to live that much longer after that. I would think he was probably about 50, 50 years old at the time. So he came back. He did what he needed to do. He walloped all of the riders, the old timers of that era. And that was, of course, the last time he ever sat on a bicycle, I think. Yeah. And, I won't reveal what happened because I think the readers need to find that out for themselves.
Well, what do you hope kids walk away from when they read The Black Cyclone?
An appreciation for what it took to excel under extremely harsh conditions. I think Major Taylor really was a pioneer in very early civil rights movement, way before that term ever came to fruition. Let's see, Booker T. Washington was um, a friend, and he really enjoyed going back and forth with Booker T. Washington and trying to get across. I mean, Booker T. was somewhat of a staunch believer in paying your dues, taking your time, accepting white man's version of where you're supposed to be in your life. And they argued about that. But there were other associates who, including Jack Johnson, the boxer, who didn't believe that at all. Du Bois, William Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, who was a complete opposite of Washington, believed that it was time to take what's yours. Some of his writings, he was the founder of the NAACP. He was Crisis Magazine, the most popular black literature of the day, was published in Crisis Magazine. So Major Taylor, W.B. Du Bois, they were friends. I'll tell you one quick story that is in the book about Jack Johnson, but I think that tells you that he was very, very concerned about the future of black athletes and where they needed to be in their lives. And until probably his dying day, he believed that it was important to give them their best shot. Keep in mind that in the 1890s, blacks were banned from many sports. They were simply not allowed to play. So, of course, it'd be a joke today, but you can see what it was like to endure, especially in America.
I think it's really important for kids growing up right now where we're still talking about civil rights. We're still talking about how we're treated by race and gender and all that. And I think that it's important for kids to see the kind of where our culture has come from, which it's amazing to see from, 1900 to today. There has been an amazing steps forward, but there's still a lot of room to continue to bridge that gap and to heal from just those past atrocities and hard things that have happened in just so many different people's lives. And I love that this story kind of gives light to that for young kids to kind of explore what it was like to be a young African-American athlete and what that was truly like. Because it's a different world now, but there are lots of similarities.
Yes, indeed.
Well, John, what can we expect next from you?
Well, I'm working on my own biographical or autobiographical piece that will include some of the most, I promise, amazing stories, and tracing it back to a goblin era when things were not right with me. And I felt like I needed to, without going into some of the lugubrious details, some things happened to me in my youth that I feel like it's time to tell what happened. And so, yeah, I'm going to do that. And there'll be uplifting pieces of it too, but it'll be short stories. And I'm working on that one. Yeah, that's coming, but I'm in no rush to finish. The books that I've written in the past, all five of them, five of the six, have all been under deadline, and I cannot write that way. It just doesn't flow. One of my books, which I did for Human Kinetics called Mastering Cycling, was written under deadline, and it was just laborious trying to do a book like that. And I got exactly what I needed but it wasn't fun. And I think if as an author, if you don't enjoy the process, what's the point? Because ultimately it'll come back to the reader.
They'll feel it through the words, won't they? If the author doesn't really enjoy what they're doing, for certain.
Yes.
Well, where can people find out more about you and your books?
What's an easy? Well, right now we're down. Howard Performance Sports is part of the coaching realm. We're revising our entire website, but MajorTaylorStory.com should be up. I know we're working on that one too, but I think it should be there. MajorTaylorStory.com. You can purchase the book there. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. You can get it certainly at Amazon. And you should be able to get an autographed copy from the website.
Very exciting. We'll make sure to have those links in the show notes so people can find that easily. Thank you so much for joining me today, John.
Thank you so much, Valerie.
And thank you for joining John and me on this episode of the BookWorthy podcast. Check the show notes for any books or links that we discussed, and let us know in the comments what is your favorite way to eat potatoes. Be sure to like and subscribe to discover more great books together. Happy reading!